Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. In the last session, we talked about loops in C programming and why we are using them. And today we are going to talk about other types of loops like for and do while. We also mentioned about two main different types of while loops. Whenever you know the number of data entry, then you use the counter control one. For example, you know exactly the user will enter 10 number of data, so you use a control counter one. And then there was another type when you don't know exactly how many data will be entered by the user. Then you will use a flag value so that whenever the user mentions about the flag value, then you get out of the loop. So counter control one and sentinel control one, which we talked about in the previous session. And now we are going to talk about other type of loop, which is named for loop. So in for loop, this is the format. Here in the first component of for loop, we mentioned about the initial value of your variables. So you see, they are separated by semicolon inside the same parenthesis. So you mentioned about the initial value in the first component. Then the second one is related to your upper or lower boundary. For example, when you wanted to count from 1 to 10, then 10 was your upper bound. And you can mention, for example, this loop can continue until the number 10 in the second component. So this is the place that you check when it will be ended. And the third component, this one shows the trend. That, for example, should I go through this loop 1 by 1, 2 by 2, or something like that. In an example, I can illustrate this one much better for you. But just for you guys to know, it contains 3 components as the expression. And after that, same as while loop, you see the statement. So if this condition holds, then this statement will be executed. So in this example, you can see how we can use such a format. So here before the semicolon, we mentioned about the initial values. You see, we can even define the variable type here, and you use comma because you are defining 2 variables here. So both of them are integer, and both of them we initialize them by the number 0. So they're starting by 0. And in the second component, how do I understand this is the second one? Because we have semicolon here. So this part is the first component, which is initializing our loop. The second one shows the boundary. Okay, j plus I, this one should be less than or equal to 10. If it becomes 11, 12, or something like that, which is bigger than 10, then we should get out of the loop. And what's the trend? The trend is that we should add to j and I 1. So 1 by 1, they are increasing. It's like in the first execution, it will be 0. Then in the next one, it should be 2. So 2 plus 2 is 4. This is still less than 10. So again, we continue. We add 1 to each of them, and we continue until this condition doesn't hold. So let's see them in different examples. But before that, let me show you how different it is with while loop. First of all, whatever you could type as while loop, you can do the same for and vice versa. So let's see what are the differences. Here in while, we should define the variable before we are dealing with the loop. So count is defined before the loop. But here, you define it inside the loop itself as the first component of the expression. In while loop, we have printf. Again, we have printf here as the statement, so this is the same. You can also use block like here, so this is the same too. And here we have the condition that count should be less than or equal to 10. Otherwise, this one won't be executed and we get out of the loop. But here for for loop, we show it in the second component. And here is the trend. One by one, you should add to count. And we show it here as the third component of for. So you see, for is more compact. You can type it faster like this. This is the format that usually programmers prefer. It's very easy to define sequences, series, and so on. And as you can see, this is the expression, as we said, a statement as we have it here. So whatever you can type as while loop, you can do the same for loop as well. Now let's take a look at this example. Assume that I want to print out the number 2 until 20, but it is increasing 2 by 2. So 2 plus 2, 4 plus 2, 6 plus 2, and so on. So how can I define it by using a for loop? So first of all, they define max count as 20. You can even type here 20 right away. There's no need for that. You see, for basic examples, this one is not that much useful to define a constant before the main function. But when it will get complicated, especially when you study lecture 6, then you will understand that why such tricks are important for us. Okay, so when we get inside the main function, we define count before it. It is possible also to define it here. So int count equal to 2 instead of typing this one. And in the second component, you can see the condition is that we continue until the number 20. If this is 21 or 22, then we should get out of the loop. So what's the trend? 2 by 2, you should add to count. So if it was count plus plus here, it was 2, 3, 4 until 20. But now we have 2 here. So it means that count is equal to 2 plus count. And as we said, we can use this notation to type it faster. So if this condition holds, print out count. So it will start from 2. It will print it out. Then 4, it will print it out until it reaches 22, and then okay, we get out of the loop and we don't print it out anymore. So this statement won't be executed when we reach 22. All right, in this example, we can see how we can show your data in a table. C doesn't understand that this is a table. We cannot define tables like this. But this is just for the user to show the user this is a kind of tabular format. In order to do that, it is possible to use this one. So you mention about the title of each column, and you use these lines in order to show that they are separated from one another. Then under it, by using the /n, you can separate them and put them inside different lines. So 1, 1, 1, then /n, we go to the next line, and so on. Okay, but the thing we want to emphasize on is related to the for loop. So we start from 1. Num should be less than or equal table size. Table size is already defined as a constant equal to 10. What's the trend? 1 by 1 we should add to it. So 1, 2, 3, and we continue until we reach 10. So 10 times, you can see, we should have number of data entry. And for the next ones, as we don't get it from the user, we just calculate it ourselves. So inside the printf, the expression is that we calculate the square in the second column and the cube in the third one, you see. So you can make your calculation here, or before that, it's also possible to use a block here and define, for example, square is equal to this, cube is equal to this, and then print out square and cube. This is also possible. So another example. Here you see we give the value 0 to sum, and the number we just define it as an integer. And inside our for loop, we start from 2. we continue until 100. And what's the trend? 2 by 2. So 2, 4, 6, and we continue until 100. Then what we are doing inside this statement, you can see sum is equal to, sum at the beginning is very important that you made it equal to 0. If you don't do it, C doesn't understand what number should be added in order to calculate sum. So number plus exactly which constant should be in order to have sum. So it's important to define your initial value sometimes, like this one. So from 2 to 100, 2 by 2, add to sum. It means that we are calculating the even numbers less than 100. This is what we are doing. Okay, so at the end, we tell what's the value of sum, and that's it. So you see, for loop is as much as useful as while loop that we defined in the previous session. We have another format named do while. Do while is very similar to while loop, but the only difference is that we see the statement before the condition. So in while loop, we had while, the expression here, we didn't have semicolon. Instead of that, we had a block or just one sentence about the statement, and we could execute it if the condition holds. But what's the difference here? Here, first we are executing once this statement, and then we are checking the condition. If the condition holds, again we do it. If the condition holds, again we do it. So this loop continues until we reach a point that this condition doesn't hold, and we finally get out of the loop. This is how it works. So first we execute the statement, then we are evaluating the expression. We check if the condition holds or not. We go through this loop until finally this condition doesn't hold and we get out of this loop. So pay attention to this example. So assume that we already defined counter to be equal to 1. When we type like this, what does it mean? It means that this is a pseudocode, not algorithm, right? It means that if you want to define it in editor, then you should say int counter is equal to 1, right? So whenever we write it like this is just pseudocode. All right, so for do while, first we are executing this statement. So we're printing out counter, which is 1. Then we check the condition. If plus plus counter is less than or equal 10 or not. Whenever you have plus plus before counter, it means that first you apply it, then you check it. For printf, we had the same situation. If we had printf plus plus counter, then it means that 2 should be printed out. But if it was counter plus plus, first we print out 1, then we add 1 to the counter. This one, I hope you already practiced that. So if 2 is less than or equal 10, which it is, so again we go through this loop. Then we add 1 to it until we get 11 and we get out of the loop, so we don't print out 11 here. So you see the differences between this one and while loop. They are doing exactly the same job, but the only difference is that we are executing one sentence before checking the counter. Why this is useful? If you remember in some examples, in order to get inside our while loop, we needed to use printf and scanf once extra before while. Now we don't need to do it in do while. First you get the first value from the user, then you check, for example, if it holds the condition or not. So that's the beauty of do and while. You don't need to repeat printf and scanf once more before your while loop. Okay, so it was the things related to for loop and do while. Now I want to mention about break and continue statements, which we use a lot in our program. This is very useful for us to know about them. We used break also once in one of our examples in order to get out of our loop faster. Also, we use that inside the switch. If you remember, we had the switch statement, case 1, case 2, and so on. If we wanted to get out of the switch before checking all the cases, we could use a break. We can also use them inside loops as well. So pay attention to the following two examples, which are very important, related to break and continue statements. Okay, for this one, first we initialize x, but we don't give an actual value to it. We just define it as an integer. And then we define this loop, 1, and the upper bound here is 10. Not always we are increasing numbers. Sometimes, for example, we start from 10 and we reach 0, for example, here, and we have x minus minus. So this is not always the increasing manner. So our loop showing that we are going from 1 to 10, 1 by 1. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 until 10. So what we are doing inside the statements. In the description part, you remember you use these notations to describe something to other users or programmers. So C doesn't consider it. If x is equal to 5, then terminate loop. How we can do it? If x double equality is important. Otherwise, it understands that 5 is assigned to x. That's not what we are going to do here. We want to check whether x is equal to 5 or not. Okay, so if x is equal to 5, then break. It means that whenever x reaches 5 inside the loop, get out of the loop. Don't continue. What else is happening inside this loop? So here you see this block ends here, not here. We should be careful about that. This is the first block. This is the second block. This block shows it for the for loop, but this block is related to the condition. Okay, so these things we should practice, because when the example is getting more complicated, we shouldn't forget that where we open the curly bracket and when we are ending it. That's why we put the description for you, that remember, this is the place that you end for, this is the place that you end if. Sometimes you can use this description for yourself too, not to forget when you finish this one. Okay, it is related to if, not to for. All right, so we said one by one, we want to go from 1 to 10, but as soon as it reaches 5, we get out of the loop. We don't print out this one anymore, because this one is inside the loop. Whenever we are inside it, we go until the end of the for loop and we print out the result. So 1, this is not equal to 5, it will be printed out. 2, it is not equal to 5, it will be printed out. Until we reach 5, which is equal to 5, then we should break it. So you see in the result, you don't see 5 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we get out of the loop. But as soon as you get out of the loop, we are printing out something else. If we didn't print it out, then it was the final result. But now outside the loop, you are printing out again the value of x, which is equal to 5 here. Okay, so this is an important example that it's very nice to go through it again and again. And after that, try to distinguish it with the continuous statement. So what does continuous statement do? Let me show you in the example. It's much easier to understand it here. So again, the same as the previous example, but instead of break, we use continue. So let's see what's the difference. Whenever we reach 5, it means that don't go through the loop anymore, but go to the next value of the loop. It means that when this is 5, continue with the loop, but don't do whatever we have here as the statements. So this printf for 5 will be ignored whenever you use continue here. This is the difference between break and continue. For break, whenever you see break, you get out of the loop. You don't care what else is happening here. You just get out of the loop. But whenever you see continue, it means that forget about this condition. Just go to the next value of x and then continue the loop. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, all of them will be printed out. When you reach 5, then this part won't be executed, and then we don't print out 5. So we go from 4 to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 cannot be printed out. So you go to 6, again we continue. So this conditional hold, we can continue, and until 10. This is the place that we should get out of the loop. So please practice with break and continue statements. They can be very useful in order to type your codes. Okay guys, so it was our lecture 5. Let's take 10 minutes break, then we will deal with your questions related to previous worksheets or even the current worksheets if you already dealt with that.